Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Feeding Communities in the Eye of the Storm, Food Systems, Nutrition, and Natural Disasters. We'll just wait another minute or two to have some more attendees join us. Please feel free in the meantime to introduce yourselves in the chat. Wonderful. So good morning again, everyone. My name is Danielle Walwyn. I'm the Advocacy Officer at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and lead of our youth arm, Healthy Caribbean Youth. We're so excited that you are with us today. Today, we're going to be diving into an important and timely conversation about food and nutrition security during times of crisis. We just wrapped up a hurricane season that had devastating consequences, and we hope that this webinar may provide an opportunity for reflection. Today, we will explore how natural disasters disrupt food systems and the resultant impact on the health of our communities. The webinar also marks an exciting milestone as we officially launch the Healthy Caribbean Coalition's newest resource, Safeguarding Public Health Nutrition in the Caribbean During Times of Emergency, Principles for Managing Food, Beverage, Financial, and In-Kind Donations from the Commercial Sector. Finally, throughout our session, we'll hear from a diverse group of stakeholders who will bring unique perspectives and actionable recommendations on how we can keep nutrition at the forefront during times of crisis. This ongoing cross-sectional conversation is critical, given the exorbitant NCD rates that our region experiences, and we know that a large part of that is due to the nutritional transition. We look forward to, here we go. We look forward to having all the panelists and presenters for today. And with them, they're bringing an immense amount of passion and expertise. And so with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. James Hospitalis, Executive Director and founder of Earth Medic and Earth Nurse, Foundation for Planetary Health, and also member of the HEC's Board of Directors to provide opening remarks. Dr. Hospitalis?
Thank you very much, Danielle, and good morning from Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm based. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be the moderator for this session. I love the title, In the Eye of the Storm. I used to be on the Caribbean Disaster Response Team of PAHO for 8 years, and we sometimes went after the storms had done their stuff. I'm pleased to be a moderator and also to kick off with a few remarks. I'll be touching on three things: the context of our small island developing states, the challenges we face with food and nutrition, especially after disasters, and the importance of the new HCC donation guide. And then I want to conclude just a few words on the Conference of the Parties that governs trying to deal with climate change, trying to deal with biodiversity and with plastics. So I think probably people on this webinar already know that there are some 50 or so small island developing states in the world, depending on how you count it. About half of them are in the Caribbean, and the others are the Pacific, the Indian Ocean. I had the pleasure of being in the Pacific at the Commonwealth Heads of Government conference last month, where some of the same problems with nutrition, with obesity, a lot of chronic health problems, and a very tangible climate threat of rising sea levels. You see the fear in some people's faces when you speak to them from Vanuatu and other places that are going under the water. So we live in a watery part of the world, and as you know, climate change is unfolding with the burning of fossil fuels, putting a lot of heat, trapping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And most of that heat is stored in the ocean. Did you know that 90% of all the extra heat that's generated from human activity is stored in the ocean? What does that mean? Well, it means many things. It means bigger, more powerful storms that are wetter and that'll last longer, as exemplified by Beryl and Helene and Milton and some of the others that went by this past season. They get stronger faster, they are wetter, they linger longer, so they're more destructive to crops, to people's properties, tourism industry, agriculture, you name it. extra heat in the ocean is also bleaching the corals. And that has implications for the fish stocks, because coral reefs are nurseries, has implications for coastal defenses. And so we are even more at risk of receiving imported food that's high in salt, fat, sugar, and high in calories in these situations post-disaster. We're generally at risk, but even more so after disasters. And so the importance of the new guide from the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, I was really happy to see this. It's going to help countries and help others think about and manage how they receive donations. There's another problem in the donations world, which is medical supplies. People send you all kinds of things that are out of date or almost expired, and then you just don't know what to do. I was in Jamaica some time ago where they faced this. That's not the subject of today. Today we're focused on the guide for handling donations, especially of food products. And those food products often come in plastic packaging, which is a transition to the last point I want to make about the Conference of the Parties, the COPs, not Commissioner of Police. There are three major things going on in our world that threaten especially our small island states. One is climate change. The second is biodiversity loss because of destruction of nature. And the third is pollution. And they are very related. They're very connected, these three threats. The Conference of the Parties just concluded in Baku, in Azerbaijan, for trying to deal with the climate change. And there were some people who said we've made progress, and there were many that did not. Earthmedic wrote an article in the Trinidad Guardian newspaper on Monday saying that these things are not fit for purpose. Why? Well, you're trying to control greenhouse gas emissions, and the man in charge, the president of the thing, was a oil company CEO. And the president of the country that this meeting was hosted in said, gas and oil are a gift from God, and people need it. And indeed, they're a gift from God, but you can misuse gifts from God. Tobacco is a gift from God, and it kills about 8 million people a year. So this is a conflict of interest issue. There were 1,700 lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry in that conference. Is that wrong or is that wrong? If you switch to the biodiversity conference of the parties just concluded in Cali, Colombia, similar, over 600 lobbyists from the meat and pesticide and fossil fuel industry. And those talks ended in disarray with people not agreeing on how they're gonna deal with biodiversity loss, which is mostly through human overconsumption, destruction of nature. And then the third of these big problems, plastics, just within recent weeks, as you may have heard, that in South Korea, again, those talks ended in disarray, and again, with several hundred people from industry in those talks. So it's time to stop the corporate capture of these, the negotiations for managing these important problems, where we in the SIDS are really at the front line of these challenges. So with those introductory remarks, just touching on the context of SIDS and where we are, the importance, therefore, of the donation guide and the COP processes, which are seriously flawed, I would like to bring this little bit to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hospitales, for those important remarks, reminding us that the conversation we're having today is part of a broader global conversation, part of global processes, and just the reality for small island developing states, including those in the Caribbean. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how we unpack some of those ideas that you presented today. Before we delve into our first presentation, we really do want to hear from all of you. We have one question that I think will set the stage for the conversation today, and we're going to be using Mentimeter, so you can feel free to scan the QR code that is on the screen, or you might be able to access the Mentimeter via the chat. So I'll give you a moment to do that, and we just have one question before we delve into our first presentation. And as we're waiting for a few people to Great. I'm seeing some folks joining, and I see that we have folks across the region joining us today. So thank you so much for introducing yourselves in the chat. Excellent. Feel free to continue to do that and to share your comments throughout the conversation today. All right, so we have a couple people in, and it really is just, again, one question. In your experience, have natural disasters affected your eating habits? Okay, we're having some responses coming in. So far, majority are saying yes. And I think that, again, that's telling. And it's clear that the impact of this conversation today, I think, will have a resounding effect on all of us and hopefully our communities. And feel free if you would like to expand on this response in your chat. But I did think it was important to just set the stage with this question. So hopefully our presenters, panelists will keep this in mind as we move forward. All right, so we are going to have our first presentation. It's my pleasure to welcome our first presenter, Mr. Francin Jean, Food Security Officer from FAO, and he is going to help us unpack the impact of natural disasters on food systems. Francin, feel free to share your slides, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Danielle. Let me share my screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
There we go. Yes, we can.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Danielle. It's really a great pleasure being here. We appreciate the opportunity to participate and present in this very important webinar. I bring greetings on behalf of the FAO Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean, and particularly on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Roberto Sandoval, who is our recent disaster risk management specialist for our office here in the Caribbean. Unfortunately, he was not able to participate in this event today. Hence the reason I will be presenting on his behalf. And again, my name is Francin Jean. I'm a food security officer for the sub-regional office in the Caribbean base here in Barbados. In this presentation, I was tasked to speak a bit on some of the ways how disasters can impact the food systems. But before I do so, I would like to set the tone when it comes to what we understand by disasters and food systems. Starting with a disaster, according to our most recent publication on the impact of disasters and on agriculture and food security that was published in 2023 by FAO. We define disaster as a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society at any scale due to hazardous events interacting with conditions of exposure, vulnerability, and capacity, leading to one or more of the following, including human, materials, economic, and environmental loss and impacts. In this case, although I know that this event has a focus particularly on storms and hurricanes, we are seeing disaster as something that englobes more than that. So we are seeing disaster as something that englobes hydrometeorological issues, including flood, droughts, cyclones, storms, extreme temperatures, and also geophysical, including earthquake, volcanic activity, tsunami, landslides. Also biological, including plant, animal, and pest and disease. And also environmental, including wide fire and forest fire, and societal, including conflict. And also the understanding we are having also as part of this presentation is that there have been an increased trend in severity and frequency from 100 per year in the 1970s to around 400 events per year in the past 20 years. So in this graph here, you can see more kind of how these frequencies and severities are being presented through the years. Also, in terms of disasters, we are with the understanding that over the last 30 years, there is an estimated 3.8 trillion US dollars worth in crops and livestock production. That is mainly due to disaster. We are talking about approximately 123 billion US dollars per year being lost in terms of crops and livestock production. And also we are with the understanding that the most affected have been lower and lower middle income countries with an approximate 10 to 15% of the total agricultural GDP being lost. And also the small island development states, which the Caribbean, as already mentioned by James, is a part. We found approximately 77% in terms of agricultural GDP lost. Here in this graph on the right, we have some data for many different sub-regions throughout the globe. In the case of the Caribbean, we are seeing that this total is approximately 9% in terms of agricultural GDP loss. Also important to mention here before we go a bit further is that when it comes to data describing the impact of disasters on the agri-food system or the food system per se, this has been quite scarce and partial and in many cases inconsistent. So please keep that in mind. Now, in terms of food systems, the definition we are using here is the definition we have from the Food Security and Nutrition Building a Global Narrative towards 2030 that was published by FAO in 2020. Here I have a link, so I invite the participants to have a look at it. And here also I have a graph of the framework. So basically we are saying food systems as a system that gathers all the elements, including an environment, people, inputs, processes, infrastructures, and institutions, and activities related to production, processing, distribution, preparation, storage, and consumption of food. And also all the outputs of these activities, including nutrition and health outcomes, and also more broader socioeconomic and environmental outcomes. Now, when it comes to ways disaster impact food system, given the definitions just provided by for disasters and the definition provided for food systems, you will understand that there are many different ways how disasters can impact the food systems. But here, what I try to do, I summarize, I bring a couple of them, starting with the impact on the availability of agricultural inputs and other productive resources, including the labor, fertilizers that may not be able to reach the farmers, water that may be too much or too less, soil degradation because of flooding, and so on. All these end up affecting the amount of food that can be produced, and also the yield and the production, and in the end that would in fact affect many of the dimensions of food security, including availability, how stable food is, and also the incomes that farmers may dispose to purchase more inputs or to purchase food. Another way I bring here is the spike in pests and diseases that maybe because of the increase of the temperature or maybe because of many other ways that may end up affecting the yield and the amount of products that food that can be produced, and also that would end up affecting the amount of food that can be available within the systems, and the stability of food that may be available from a certain period of time, but other period of time they may not be available because of this disease and the pest. And also that may reduce the amount of incomes that actors involved in the systems may have because of the impact of those pests and diseases. A third one can be also the direct impact on infrastructures, including roads, either because of landslides, transportations, because of hurricanes, and so on, energy systems that may end up causing disruptions across the food supply chain, affecting all of the dimensions, whether it is the amount of food that may be available, the price of the food, the quality of the food, the nutrient value of the food, and so on. And the fourth one I bring here is concerns regarding food safety, either because of the lack of the roads that farmers may not have access to adequate roads to transport the foods they have from one area to another, or either because of consumers may not be able to access the market points, either because of the perishability of certain products, which may end up with a lot of losses and wasted throughout the systems. And that would, of course, end up affecting many different dimensions of the food and nutrition security, including availability, the incomes that, the amount of incomes that different actors may have available and throughout the systems. In terms of example, here on the right, I bring the example of data from post-disaster need assessment that shows nearly 23% of the total economic losses due to disasters were sustained by the agricultural sector. That is an example that kind of demonstrates some of the impacts, some of the ways I just described earlier. Other ways include also the strategies that some of the actors may take or come up to cope with some of the events. For instance, when it comes to the amount of loans that may be available to farmers, some of the banks may not allocate the same amount of funds that they used to allocate before because of the risk associated to the sector, and also the type of practice that farmers may implement when it comes to the farming. And also importantly, when young people participating in the sector, what we have seen is that in some cases, they may look for off-farm options instead of getting involved in the agricultural sectors. And this is something that many of you may know, is that in the Caribbean, we have an issue with the aging in the agricultural sector, where young people are participating less and less in the agri-food system. And it's another ways disasters can impact the food system is also the high dependence on external and other alternative sources of food that may also be linked with not only the quantity of the food that may be available, but also the quality. James spoke about that earlier. The Caribbean relies a lot on the importation of food that may end up being a food high in sodium and salt and sugar. And also what we have seen also, there may be an increase and certainly, as already mentioned, in prices and also the stability. All in all this will end up affecting the diet quality, the nutrient, and the diversity when it comes to the type of foods that can be made available for consumers. I'm concluding the presentation with this a graph here that speaks of the cost, talking about price, that speaks about the cost of healthy diets in the Caribbean that has been increasing. And also what we can see here is that the Caribbean has had the highest cost of healthy diets compared with the other sub-region in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2017, the cost of healthy diets was estimated to approximately $4 PPT dollars. Now, and according to the most recent data we have for 2022, it's approximately 5.16 PPT dollars. And all these variations and increase in the cost of healthy diets has a direct correlations with the different ways disasters impact food systems I just spoke about earlier. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Francine. It was interesting because as those of you who were on from the very beginning, we did a Mentimeter to see how our eating habits change, food and nutrition security might change during a natural disaster. And Francine, you gave us kind of what's happening on the back end, what's happening in the broader food system that might impact what we see in front of us when we're actually having our meals. So thank you so much for giving that broad overview. And I think probably all of us have a greater appreciation for how these disasters are impacting what we eat. And your final point, and I'm glad that you ended on that point. It was around how it impacts the quality of food, and which leads to nutrition security. And we all know that vulnerable populations can become even more vulnerable during times of crisis. And that brings us very nicely into our next presentation, which is from Maisha Hutton, who is HCC's Executive Director, and she's going to provide an overview of HCC's newest resource, which aims to provide guidance on an activity that comes with crisis, from COVID, we saw it during COVID, to natural disasters that we're talking about today, donations. So Maisha, over to you.
Thanks, Danielle. We're really excited to be releasing this resource. It's been a long time in the planning. It was conceptualized back during the pandemic and on the heels of a series of incredibly devastating hurricane seasons, where we saw the impact of disasters on the food system, building on Francine's comments, and the impact in particular on vulnerable populations. So the guidelines, the purpose of the guidelines, first and foremost, is to safeguard public health nutrition. And the guidelines provides guidance on the types of beverages, financial and in-kind donations that provide nutritious food options and protect diets during disasters or emergency response situations. And importantly, these guidelines are based on principles of human rights and equity, and the fundamental principle that all Caribbean people have a right to access adequate food. The audience for the document includes, but is not limited to, civil society organizations, governments, disaster relief organizations, executive agencies, and the commercial sector, including, but not limited to, the food and beverage industry. We could really take an hour or an hour and a half to go through these guidelines in detail, and we will do that in the coming year. But right now, because we can't do that, I wanted to give you guys an overview of what's included in the guidelines. There's a snapshot of the key elements, some important definitions and concepts. Then we go into a standard introduction and background. Then we take a closer look where we provide some meat around each of the principles. Then we look at the evidence-based protocol examples out there, some of which inspire the HCC's document. Those are guidelines from Uruguay and Colombia and UNICEF. And then we have a Q&A section which answers questions we believe you may have. And then we go into some example scenarios, provide examples of acceptable and unacceptable donations, look at long-term solutions, and then wrap up. So the regional context, we're all aware of the high rates of NCDs and overweight and obesity and its impact on development, and the ongoing challenges that we have around food and nutrition sovereignty. We import most of what we consume, and food and nutrition insecurity, and how this is exacerbated by increasing climate-related shocks like what Franson and James have described. So let's talk a bit about commercial actors and the role that they play in these scenarios. They're significant players. They often fill very important gaps in the public sector. And they, because of the absence of weak regulation and also the nature of these emergency settings, we find that we've seen a prioritization of quantity over quality and profits over public health. And the result is an oftentimes offloading of heavily branded, cheap, unhealthy products, in particular ultra-processed products. And those very often disproportionately impacted, as Danielle just alluded to, are vulnerable populations. And so very quickly, ultra-processed products, for those who may not be familiar with this term, these are essentially products which are chemical formulations that cannot be manufactured in your own kitchen. They are products that are high in sugars, fats, sodium, and various additives, and they are, when consumed in excess, linked to NCDs, diet-related NCDs, obesity, and overweight. And there's increasing evidence out there about this. The NOVA classification is what is used to classify the various degrees of processing, and most importantly for us are these ultra-processed foods. And in the document, we provide examples of those. The PAHO nutrient profile model is really kind of the heart of the document in terms of defining what is healthy versus unhealthy, taking into consideration ultra-processed products. The nutrient profile was a tool developed by PAHO to help countries design food and nutrition policies. And we use this and refer to this throughout the document as kind of the benchmark to determine whether or not a food is healthy or unhealthy, in combination with, if they exist, national dietary guidelines. We also provide, as I mentioned earlier, examples of acceptable and unacceptable donations, and also optional donations. So let's get to the guidelines. There are 7 key principles that stakeholders are encouraged to follow. The first one is to refrain from seeking, accepting, or making donations of ultra-processed products, again, as defined by the nutrient profile model that PAHO has released. And neither seek or accept or make financial or other in-kind donations sourced from companies manufacturing, importing, distributing, selling, marketing, or promoting such products. Conversely, do accept and promote donations of healthy food and beverage options, again, as defined by the PAHO nutrient profile model, provided that these are not sourced from companies manufacturing, importing, distributing, selling, marketing, or promoting ultra-processed products. Number 2, partner with small-scale food producers. And you'll see a list there. And this is to encourage the inclusion of local produce in contributions to feeding programs or initiatives, thereby supporting local, healthy, equitable, and sustainable food systems. Number 3, refrain from seeking, accepting, or making donations of breast milk substitutes. And we go into detail about the exceptions in the document. Neither seek, accept, or make financial or in-kind donations sourced from companies manufacturing, importing, distributing, selling, marketing, or promoting breast milk substitutes. Number 4, ensure donations support continuity of services such as community feeding and school feeding programs, providing healthy foods to children and other vulnerable populations in accordance, again, with the nutrient profile model at PAHO. Number 5, avoid engaging in joint communications, including campaigns and/or cause-related marketing with companies, including fast food, sweet drink, and other ultra-processed product companies that produce, import, distribute, advertise, promote, market, and/or sell any ultra-processed products. And why we do this. This is in order to prevent actual, real, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest, including possible involvement or influence in public health policies and programs, and/or misperception of indiscriminate brand endorsement. Number 6, establish standards by adopting these guidelines for donations at the national level. And number 7, finally, assess and transparently document decision-making processes when accepting or rejecting donations as an important record of the current environment and to inform future decisions. So those are the 7 principles, and kind of one of the key takeaways from this is that engagement with companies that promote harmful products that are not recommended as part of the healthy diet, according to the PAHO nutrient profile model, should be avoided because of links to conflict of interest. there is a direct tension or conflict between public health goals and the objectives or goals of these private sector actors with vested interests. However, in small Caribbean countries, due to companies often having heterogeneous, healthy or unhealthy product lines, we recognize that there has to be some flexibility, because it's often not easy to differentiate between which company is a company you can work with or not because of these simultaneous products. This is often compounded by limited financial resources, relatively restricted funding options, and just the urgent need, the pressing need as nature of these disaster situations. And so the guidance recognizes the unique context of an emergency or disaster scenario, but also recognizes the unique context of the Caribbean. And therefore, we outline a series of scenarios and optional responses and potential safeguards to protect nutrition and public health and the integrity of organizations. So the scenarios, there are 7 scenarios, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you an outline of or flavor of what these scenarios look like. And they're really meant, again, to help to navigate complex scenarios. For all the scenarios, it's understood that there may be extreme conditions in which the level of need is high, combined with limited healthy donations, which necessitates acceptance of donations, which may be deemed unhealthy by the PAHO nutrient profile model. So again, just pointing to the acceptance or the acknowledgement of the reality of these situations in this guidance. So this is the first scenario. A global cola company approaches the government with a multi-million-dollar donation of its products, including sweet carbonated cola drinks and other ultra-processed beverages, and water in the wake of a devastating hurricane. The cola company indicates that they have no intention to publicize the donation in the media. What should the government do? So then we provide a series of options, which we walk you through the pros and cons of each of the options, starting from A, decline the donation, all the way to B, accept the full donation with no stipulations around publicity. Another example here is around a global ultra-processed company providing donations. And this is not just limited to food now, medical equipment, medicines, shelter, et cetera, in the wake of a crisis. So again, we walk you through the various options. So wrapping up now, why is this guidance important? And like I said, I've tried to give you all the kind of flash tour of the document, and we'll do this in more detail in the coming year. But the guidance is important because it really attempts, again, to promote and protect healthy diets in these scenarios. It attempts to assist governments, CSOs, and disaster agencies in managing these types of donations, prevents offloading of ultra-processed products, especially in vulnerable populations. And Danielle alluded to, vulnerable populations are increasingly vulnerable in situations like these, and therefore it's even more critical to try and protect their health and their diet. It safeguards food and beverage and financial and in-kind donations from conflicts of interest, which protects the image and reputation of various actors, including civil society organizations. Finally, these documents are applicable outside of disaster settings, and they're applicable across other unhealthy commodities, such as tobacco, alcohol. And so this really contributes to HCC's work around commercial determinants of health and our ongoing attempts to build and create tools to help to navigate and manage conflicts of interest within the context of NCD prevention and control. So my time is just about out. I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and just letting you know we'll share a link for the document after. Over to you, Danielle. Oh, before I go, actually, one more slide. Sorry about that. I'm over time now, but just to acknowledge the tremendous scope of individuals who've contributed to this document over its development. Thank you to GHAI for funding, the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown University, CARFA, PAHO, FAO, and of course the HCC team who's been significant inputs into the document. So thanks to all who provided all of the support. And now I'm finished. Thanks.
Thank you, Maisha, for what you call as a flash tour. I think that's really helpful. And again, I'm hoping that we've provided context as to why this document is critical now more than ever before. Personally, I really appreciate the scenarios in the document, and I think you all will as well. They're very reflective of what we experience in our Caribbean settings. So I'm hoping that you will access the document and use it. We definitely want everyone to use it. And I see we have quite a number of different stakeholders on the call. So we're hoping that you will access the document and share widely. And we will share the document at some point during the webinar. So now we really do have kind of a background knowledge of the impact of natural disasters on food and food systems. And we heard directly from Maisha about a critical resource that we think will be useful for everyone, especially in our small island developing states context. And so now I'm excited to turn over to Dr. James Hospitalis, who we've met already, and he's going to introduce our series of panelists. We're going to hear a bit more about the reality that we're all experiencing, solutions and work that's already being done, and then a vision moving forward. And I'm just encouraging everyone to please feel free to use the chat to share your reflections and also the Q&A function for your questions. Dr. Hospitalis, over to you.
Thank you again, Danielle, and thank you for the presenters earlier from Franson and from Maisha. Very important subject and very important tool to help manage a challenging situation. So I'm pleased to introduce the panel for this part of the discussion, and I'll start off by making some remarks myself, but Franson has already been introduced, is Food Security Officer for the FAO. Danielle Toppin, who had the pleasure of meeting in Jamaica in April of this year, the Director General of the Barbados Red Cross, Sean Baugh, Program Manager for Agricultural and Agro-Industrial Development in CARICOM Secretariat in Georgetown, Gabrielle Molino, who's a nutritionist, a doctoral student, and a member of the Healthy Caribbean Youth, who has been doing research on this important area. And I'm big on research. We need to do more research. We need to document more. Because when you have documentation, you can say, my research shows. And then we'll have Otto McDowell, Operations Supervisor for Helen's Daughters. So each representative on this panel is going to have 2-3 minutes to respond to questions that I'm going to be posing them as moderator before we have a chance at the end for any Q&A from the audience. From an arithmetic point of view, when Franson was talking, I was thinking, oh my gosh, nearly everything you're saying there is made worse by climate change. The hydrometeorological disasters in Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm based, it's flood, flood, flood. We're working in a municipality called Chaguanas in central Trinidad, and they've had 152 floods in the last 5 years. 150 floods in the last 5 years. That's almost one a week when you think about it. And the farmers are going crazy. And when in the dry season, it's very, very dry. So I lost things in my garden this past dry season. One of my colleagues, who is a chairman of financial institutions or a member of the board of insurance companies and banks, he says, James, we don't know what to do. The claims are going through the roof. It's not just people's property, it's the vehicles that they lose. And if a farmer has no insurance, then the next thing you do is you stop growing anything because it's just too risky. You're not making any money. So we actually need some new kinds of instruments for market vendors, for farmers, to deal with this situation. And then Franson mentioned the pests and the diseases that can happen as a result of heat and drought and flood. And so you need more heat-resistant crops or wet-resistant crops, whatever they may be. We need to have guidance on that for people at a practical level. He mentioned bushfires. Well, where I live in Trinidad, we suffer from that, and I have hoses pre-positioned. A fire ranger died about 500 meters from our house in Port of Spain. And he mentioned socio-political things. Well, climate's leading to more and more conflict and population displacement and migration. So all of those, I think only the seismic disasters are perhaps not quite in the same basket, volcanoes and the earthquakes. The other comment to make is the question, food-related health implications of extreme weather, and our response in Arithmetic and Earth Nurse is, well, want to educate people, but there's a bigger world in which we live. And one of my worries, and there is some evidence to suggest that we may be heading for this, is what happens when we have a climate crisis simultaneously affecting the bread baskets of the world. North America, Europe, China, India. Then we're really up the creek without a paddle. I won't say what kind of creek. In Trinidad, there's a rude joke about that. No, but seriously, it means we need to be growing a lot more of our own food. And I believe I'm correct. The guys with agriculture, I think it's only Haiti, Guyana, and Belize that grow more than 50% of their own food. Some places, nearly everything is imported. So we have divested sugar lands. One of the things we're doing is advocating for use of those for growing food, especially for community gardens and trees for food. Mango, avocado, a lot of indigenous crops that can grow that way. So that's one of the things that we are promoting. But definitely a very important subject, the health implications of this extreme weather and the response. We will also be championing this donations guide in our work. I think it's an important piece of how we manage what is a difficult situation. So I'm going to start off first to you, Danielle. I'll bowl you the first ball. I know you're well capable of being the opening bats person on the panel. I was in a privileged position of saying something. So perhaps you can say something about, food and nutrition insecurity and response measures in times of crisis from the Red Cross point of view. Over to you.
Hi, good morning, still morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to, I think, be one of the panelists who really will speak about the link with communities and also vulnerable communities and kind of the on the ground intersection between all of these different issues that we're speaking about this morning and how people's lives are impacted. So from a Red Cross point of view, our starting point is all of these discussions are best addressed in the preparedness phase, rather than in the response phase, which is when people tend to think about the access to food, the access to sustainable sources of food. But as with anything, when we're speaking about disaster response, the best action is to prepare ahead of time. So, and for us, the kind of intersection between food and disaster is one of our first goal at the Barbados Red Cross is, strengthening capacity to prepare for, respond to, and recover from crises. And one of the core pillars of that goal for us is that at the community level, people have enhanced capacity to adopt and maintain healthy behavior. So for us, what does that mean? That's meant things like, with community integrating, planting community gardens as part of our projects, establishing for our own self a kitchen garden, which can feed into our Meals on Wheels program, because one of the things that we have found is that our Meals on Wheels program is almost predominantly populated by, beneficiaries who have some kind of comorbid, some other conditions. For some of them, and I'd say most of them, they have comorbidities. So it's not just diabetes, it's usually, more than one health issue, and elderly populations as well. So for us, during COVID, at first, we were doing a lot of, food donations and hampers. But I love the idea of this guide because for us, one of the main things that people will usually donate is canned food, corned beef, a lot of high sodium foods. So, in response to that, over the course of our response, we started to develop kitchen garden hampers where we were giving our beneficiaries with, seedlings, a booklet. We developed a booklet on organic farming, soil, and tools, and pots, so that, wherever they were able to, feed themselves, at least even it was on a small level, but to offset some of the costs, and to build that healthy behavior. Because for us, there's no way of speaking about resilience without speaking about people who have basic levels of health to be able to respond. So at that level, for us, strengthening local food systems really has to be, how do we as organizations and individuals kind of create alternatives to, the same things we've been speaking about, the high reliance on food imports, the vulnerability of the food sectors, as we in Barbados would have seen with the passage of Beryl, and the impact on the fishing sector. So, one of the things in our assessments that we did also find is that some of the fishing villages that were the least impacted were those that used the Moses boat and the kind of more sustainable practices of agriculture, so that they were not as heavily impacted as maybe the longliners and the boats who rely on the tuna and the deep sea fishing. So on that level, I mean, that's one area for us of response and our practical experience. I think it's also important for programs such as Barbados Red Cross's Meals on Wheels, the school feeding program, to really start to implement tailored emergency nutrition programs. I think we always think about food as in, I'll need 1 week of supplies, but really supply chains can be disrupted for a long time. So when we're thinking about emergency nutrition programs, I think it is about encouraging communities and households to grow more of their food, so that, any nutrition programs, organizations such as Red Cross, to grow more of our own food, so that we're not only providing a meal that meets basic needs, but we're also mainstreaming people's health concerns into the meals that we do provide. Really, at the community level, expanding community-based response mechanisms. I've spoken to this before, that's a foundation of resilience. So, I think that we can all encourage or support in different ways, be it through our own pockets, be it through our programs that we're involved in our organizations, community-based response mechanisms. So it's not just teaching search and rescue, it's also encouraging community gardens. And like I said, this is something we've done before. And then lastly, I'd say thinking about long-term holistic solutions, where it's not just these kind of short-term fixes where we're donating canned foods and we think that the problem has been solved. It's thinking, and it brings me back to my initial point. The best way to respond to any disaster is to prepare adequately. And I would say that for all of us, that's really something that I'm listening to the discussions this morning, and it's also reminding me about what more we as an organization can do to make sure that, our beneficiaries are not as negatively impacted as they may be when there's the disruption of food chains, and to make sure that we are also more systematically integrating things like food resilience into our community disaster response training. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. And you opened and closed with the importance of taking this thing long in advance of the crisis, being systematically prepared. So I'm going to switch back to Francine Jean, and how is FAO contributing, would you say, towards building a more resilient food system across the Caribbean, given the changes we're seeing with climate?
All right, thank you very much, James. In FAO, kind of similar to what Daniel mentioned a while ago, you're given a very important place to preparedness and anticipatory actions, with a particular focus on, as mentioned during my presentation earlier, there is an issue with data collection, the availability of data. So we are given a particular focus, a particular place, an important place when it comes to building evidence, making sure that data can be collected, data information can be monitored. Hence the reason FAO has been working with the countries in the region and using drones, satellites, and undertaking participatory geographic information system actions. Also, importantly, FAO has been working with the government and making sure that resources can be mobilized through funding opportunities like the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Funds, and making sure that enough and appropriate amount of resources can be made available to promote the adoption of inclusive adaptive actions that may include nutrition sensitive crops and value chains, including fisheries and adapted species, soil management, the pest and disease management, and so on. And also importantly, supporting initiatives that facilitate tailored extension services to the needs of the most vulnerable and the context created by the disasters. Also importantly, FAO has been working with countries in the region to leverage from existing social protection programs, including school feeding programs. So those programs can be programs that facilitate access to healthy diets while creating connections with small farmers and the territories where those programs are being implemented. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Franson. Good, concise answer. Switching then to the CARICOM Secretariat, Sean, how would you say CARICOM is building more resilient food systems in the region, considering especially the work of the CARICOM Special Ministerial Task Force on Food Production and Food Security?
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Certainly the persons from around the region and around the world who are also on. Let me first say that the CARICOM region takes the whole issue of food and nutrition security as priority. It's a permanent fixture on the head's agenda that takes place twice a year. For us, there's a direct relation to natural disasters, whether it be hurricane, flood, or drought, and the food and nutrition security status of the region. It can be tracked that each time one passes, our food import bill goes up. And in some cases, in all cases, most of the time, livelihoods are destroyed and never return. And that is replaced through imports, and that affects our food and nutrition security status. Having recognized this, the heads developed what is called, or put in place what is called a special ministerial task force on food production and food security, which is chaired by Guyana. And the aim of the MTF for short, it's called, and the aim is really to develop, commercialize, and develop the region's agri-food system in a sustainable manner. It addresses production, it addresses training, it addresses insurance, it addresses capital financing, and so forth. What has been done? There is an existing agricultural risk and disaster management policy that's co-chaired by SEDEMA and the FAO. And this committee was put in place after Beryl. That's the first time it was really tested. And we saw interesting results, and this was streamlined through the MTF. Now, Beryl caused a significant loss to the sector throughout the region, close to 500 million US, if not more, and in some cases, 85% loss as relates to the agricultural sector in some member states. It's important to us. As a result, there have been several things that have been put in place, both short-term, long-term, and so on. And it pretty much covers what's been discussed before. Donations certainly is streamlined through SEDEMA, and the type of donations is recommended through this committee that have the necessary agricultural experience that fits into the region food and nutrition security policy. So it is an era that the Ministerial Task Force has been working on that takes serious, have been put in policies, have been put in actual activities that have been tackling it. And I should put forward that for the first time this year, we've been able to organize with a regional private sector insurance company that has developed a product for the farming community that is specially tailored to assist in times of disaster and crisis to ensure food and nutrition security. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. It struck me when you said, each time one passes, the food import bill goes up. I take it you meant the hurricanes and so on, and I would love to talk to you separately about actually writing a paper on this. I'm guest editing a special issue of the Journal of Climate Change and Health on climate and its impacts in SIDS. It would be great to have a paper from the food angle and what the climate means for food and nutrition security. So if we're going to switch now, I'm going to switch now to you, Gabrielle. And we've heard from some of the agencies that are doing work in this area. And if we're to look ahead, Gabrielle, as a doctoral student interested in the impact of natural disasters and nutrition, what do you think CARICOM policymakers should do to center nutrition during times of disasters? I would, given the messages we've been receiving, it's not just during times of disasters, although that's the focus. It's before, during, and after.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Hospitalis, and good morning to everyone. Rightfully said, it's not just during, but also pre and post disaster. And as a doctoral student, there's nothing more important to me than stressing the strengthening evidence within our region. And as we've heard before, we don't have enough evidence currently. So I'm happy to hear that FAO is working on that. But we also need to focus on what is happening at a community level. How have eating habits changed over time? How have food supplies changed over time? Looking at scales such as the disaster food security scale that can track these things for us on a community level so that we are able to make more informed decisions and move forward to a better nutritional goal for our region. And I also appreciated how Danielle touched on our vulnerable communities. As a researcher, I find strong importance in qualitative knowledge, so actually listening and centering the voices of our marginalized communities that are usually neglected. So our indigenous populations, women, children, migrant populations. How are they uniquely impacted? As we know, they are disproportionately impacted by these type of disasters. So how can we listen and incorporate their feedback into policies that can address their unique challenges? And lastly, I want to stress the importance of climate smart agriculture and encouraging youth to be more involved in agriculture. So one of the greatest barriers is cost as well as land ownership. And I'd like to highlight there's a program called in Trinidad and Tobago called the Youth Agricultural Homestead Program that really equips youth with knowledge and skills and also gives them land ownership upon graduation. So it reduces those barriers of entry into agricultural sector. And there are already climate smart agricultural activities going around the region, but how can we amplify that and strengthen that so that we're not so reliant on importations as we just spoke about. So just to wrap up my 3 points, strengthening evidence, listening and incorporating feedback to vulnerable communities, and promoting climate smart agriculture and encouraging youth to become more involved in agriculture.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I think if you succeed in the last one, you get a big prize. Since I see from everything I read, agriculture is fewer young people are interested in it. And great to hear that you're interested in getting evidence out there. So talk to me as well about our special issue of the Journal of Climate Change and Health and SIDS and doing something on this food angle. That would be great. And then I'm going to come along to you then, Otto and Helen's daughters. You've committed to an inclusive and innovative approach to food security in your priority countries. Can you say something about what you think CARICOM policymakers and other stakeholders should be prioritizing to ensure nutrition in times of crisis is a priority?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. A few recommendations on our end. So my first recommendation would be to integrate nutrition and disaster recovery frameworks. And one of the ways they could do that, just based on our own experience at Helen's Daughters, would be through cash and voucher assistance programs. And so earlier, we saw through oftentimes we receive donations when we're in times of recovery. But from our experience at Helen's Daughters, we were able to utilize the cash and voucher assistance, and it helped highlight an important aspect of recovery, where it allows or it empowers individuals with the freedom to make choices while guiding them to prioritize health and sustainability. So unlike the traditional hampers that persons would normally receive, where you would find these hampers They're very rich in sugary foods or starchy foods. The cash and voucher programs enable people to select a diverse nutritious options, and it fosters long-term resilience. And so I think that policymakers should incorporate such programs as a standard component of disaster recovery. And this also ensures that grassroots organizations would play an active role in their implementation. And one of the ways that we've been trying to do that is by actively creating the market access to our members, but also creating that access to persons in being able to buy these healthier foods, because you find in certain parts of the island, the local foods or the ground provisions, etc., they're not as readily available as, for example, the rural communities. The second way my second recommendation would be to promote and fund sustainable agriculture in inputs post-disaster. And so you find when providing recovery support to farmers, there must be an emphasis on sustainability. And so at Helen's Daughters, we've ensured that the inputs such as seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, we make sure that they adhere to organic or non-synthetic standards. And so this commitment, it helps with minimizing environmental harm while improving the nutritional quality of the foods that are being produced. So I think that policymakers, they must prioritize funding for sustainable inputs and providing education to farmers on their use. And so we've been able to help with reaching that by providing our yearly academy program. It's free of charge. It's available to our members and non-members. For those of you who want to know more about it, you could check out our YouTube page where these courses are covered. And again, it's free of charge. And so my last recommendation would be to leverage grassroots organizations as key stakeholders in disaster recovery and nutritional resilience. And so you find that grassroots organizations such as Helen's Daughters, they of course would have the experience, they would have the information, the insight into the communities that they serve. But oftentimes, unfortunately, you find these organizations are sidelined in disaster recovery planning and merely treated as just beneficiaries. So I think that CARICOM policymakers, they must actively involve these organizations in decision-making processes, recognizing their capacity to mobilize quickly, address unique community needs, and implement nutrition-centered recovery strategies. These grassroots organizations, they are indispensable in ensuring that nutrition remains a cornerstone of our community, especially in vulnerable agricultural economies, like those in the Caribbean where we live. And so I think we've been able to kind of tackle that, especially the example of Hurricane Beryl, which recently passed, where we were able to partner with Caritas Antilles, who provide training on how to recover in the face of a disaster, post-disaster, as well as Care International, who allowed us to start the cash and voucher recovery program, which was very successful.
Thank you very much, Otto. So that winds up this section of the program, hearing from the panelists, and a lot of food for thought. No pun intended. Good job. Perhaps then we can take a couple of questions that are in the Q&A. Let's see. One of the questions is there any country in the region that includes a nutrition professional on their disaster preparedness team? And if not, has the time come for this?
I'd say very quickly, no, we don't. But actually, in preparing for this, it made me realize that our community disaster response team training should include an element about food resilience. So we sometimes forget to integrate them. So no, we don't, but I think it's very useful to do so.
Thanks, Danielle. I can share that the PAHO disaster response team, at least back in the day, had a slot for a public health nutritionist, which used to be filled by someone from CFNI, Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, which then rolled into CARFA. So maybe this is something to bring back to the forefront, that you integrate such a function into the disaster response team for the Caribbean. And then one more question refers to cash and vouchers. Are there certain foods stipulated that persons can purchase and from what kinds of vendors?
So through the cash and voucher programs, we have vendors. Yeah, of course, we would partner with certain vendors. And so those who are recipients of this program, they would be able to use these funds to be able to purchase from these vendors. Of course, the vendors would be taken into consideration. So you find if we would like to empower our recipients in making healthier choices, we would have vendors who would offer more organic foods, who would be able to offer tools in being able to recover or build back what was lost. So yes, we do have some control over what these funds are being used to buy.
Thanks, Otto. And I see someone, a dear friend and colleague, posting in the chat, Christine Bocage, who used to be at CFNI. Greetings to you. It's been a while. Nice to see that you're tuned into this session. I guess I have a question, and I'm thinking of the remarks of before I get to my question, somebody SW is asked, have we been able to quantify the role of volunteers and voluntarism in the responses? Well, Red Cross is mostly volunteers, no? So everything you do is part of that.
Quantify, it depends on what you mean. If we say we can quantify their hours, but can we quantify their impact? No.
Yeah, wait, you see a
Some
neighbor.
things are indescribable.
Okay. My question is a reflection of a question that Ravi Tiwari, who is the previous CEO of Guardian Caribbean, asked me, and that was about the need for insurance instruments that are much more responsive than what we have at the moment. So say you're a market vendor and you get flood out. Is there an instrument, and maybe I'll look at Sean here in a policy level with CARICOM, does the work of the task force include this kind of possibility that somebody could get some, because if they can't get relief, then they're going to give up market vending and they give up farming. But is there a way that people can get some quick relief?
Yes, James. There are products that we're exploring for that, and especially one we spoke about. Even though we spoke directly about for farmers, there's one being offered by CRIF. That's exactly a livelihood insurance. So it looks at the value chain than it does the actual production point. So there is a product that deals with that, and that's been offered by CRIF in this case.
Okay. It would be a great idea to have a project around to delve into this some more, I think, with the CRIF. You were referring to CRIF, right? The Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Somebody's pointing out today is World Volunteer Recognition Day. Remember our volunteers who work tirelessly for humanitarian efforts. Thank you for that, pointing that out. Any more questions? Hema Babulal. Thank you, Dr. Babulal. Food security and nutrition are linked to the robustness of local agricultural systems, such as proactive water management, given the realities of climate change. Should we advocate that state agencies take water management as a matter needed urgent and serious attention? Anybody on the panel wants to?
James, I'll give a quick go. It's interesting that question should come up because this week there's a disaster management conference in St. Kitts being put on by SEDEMA. And last week we had a conference by the CIMH on particularly that matter on water management. And member states of the CARICOM have been putting in place that place emphasis on agriculture, water management, domestic water management, and the use of water, because I mean, agriculture can't take place without water, and food security would be impacted by that. So there is a lot of work going on through member states to deal with the issue of water management, water utilization, and so on. So it's something that's high priority.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for the question, Dr. Babalao. I guess we're getting into the last leg of the session. I'm going to hand back over shortly to Danielle. And the thought that's occurring to me is around HCC and what, what's the next step for this donation guide, which seems to be quite an important tool for our region. But I'm going to pass the mic back to you, Danielle, to pick it up from here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hospitalis, and to our panelists for your contributions. That was excellent. Again, so many different perspectives. I took some notes. So I'll just do a little quick review. What's the reality? Natural disasters have a great impact on food systems. Climate change worsens this. There is an issue with data, and I think that this is an ongoing effort for all of us to play a role in. Natural disasters have led to almost 80% loss in relation to the agricultural sector in some CARICOM member states. Each time the hurricane passes, the food import bill goes up. Again, it makes the need for the donation protocol resource that we've launched today critical more now than ever before. We need to grow more of our food and strengthen partnerships with agricultural sector. And this is, again, something that's encouraged in the donation protocol. Preparedness is key, especially keeping our vulnerable populations in mind. Disaster preparedness should include food and nutrition security. And as Danielle said, tailored emergency nutrition programs is something we need to think about. I'm quoting a lot of what our panelists have said if you haven't recognized. From FAO's perspective, school feeding programs, and I think a number of us on the call can agree with this, there's a lot of opportunity to create connections with small farmers to ensure that healthy foods are more accessible. Community-based response mechanisms are a foundation of resilience. Integrating nutrition and disaster recovery frameworks should be key. Otto said, leverage grassroots organizations as key stakeholders in food and nutrition security, resilience. Evidence, but make it people-focused. According to Gabrielle, we need to really center the voices of marginalized communities. We need to be also investing in climate smart and sustainable agriculture and ensure that we are encouraging our youth to participate meaningfully in these next steps. And as per our Q&A, which I found very interesting, disaster response teams across CARICOM should include a nutritionist. And we heard in the chat that this is a reality in some countries. And really, we need to be innovative. And I just want to end on Otto's point. We need to empower recipients or empower people in making healthier choices. And it seems like Helen's Daughters is doing some innovative work there while also connecting people to farmers and persons in the agricultural sector. So again, a huge congratulations to our panelists. Those were all, and there's so many more other nuggets of information, but just those are some that I jotted down. And so at this point, I know you stepped away, but I'm going to invite you all back because we are ready to provide just some final remarks to our attendees who are on the call. And so we know that, as Dr. Hospitalis said, COP just wrapped up. And I think important for us in the non-communicable disease NCD community, we have a major meeting happening in September 2025. It's a stock-taking moment with where we are with NCDs and how we're going to move forward with NCDs. And I'm excited to hear from all of you what you think our policymakers should be doing. You already gave us a lot to think about, but just a final remark. What do you think our policymakers should be doing? And I had this as during crisis, but as per our discussion today, the effort needs to be not during crisis, it needs to be before, yes, during, and also considering what we're doing after to ensure nutrition security. So I am going to go to our panelists, and Francine, maybe I'll start with you. What are your thoughts there on that final question?
All right, thank you, Danielle. I would start with one issue that you already highlighted, the data. building evidence. I think this is an issue that policy makers should prioritize. The other one is we talk a lot about vulnerable people, vulnerable rural people. I think more attention and funding need to be allocated for those, with particular attention on transforming the food system, and also this may include making sure that those issues are appropriately incorporated in tools like the national determined contributions, the national adaptation plans, and so on. And importantly, you also mentioned, Daniel, the issue of school feeding. I think this is something that policymakers can prioritize a bit more, making sure that if possible, that it can be something universal for the countries, that all children can have access to it. And also those programs can offer a healthy diet to all students, and linkages can be created with small farmers and boosting local economies. Thank you.
Excellent, Franson. Thank you. I'm just going to pause here and encourage everybody, our attendees. A lot of you have been using the reactions button so far. Feel free to use the reaction button in this final segment where we're hearing from the panelists. Thank you, Franson. And I'm going to go to Danielle. There we go. Look at those hearts. Sorry, Danielle, you're on mute.
Again, I'd underscore preparedness. Any conversation about health and resilience should first start with preparedness. Inclusive discussions. I think civil society, and I loved what Otto said about engaging civil society and grassroots organizations. I think that it's often the easiest way to actually make headway into communities, because that's the level that we're working at. So including civil society and grassroots organizations in policy design and discussions around policies. And I would say really including those voices and finding ways to also include the voices of people from the communities, because we make a lot of decisions and we make a lot of assumptions for people, the most vulnerable in our communities. And I think we can't be informed without engagement.
Well, thank you, Danielle. And Sean?
Well, for me, I just remind everyone that it is the citizens that influence policy. So we have to start playing our role, advocating, getting involved. It's only through our actions that one policy is developed and two policies are implemented. So taking into account what everybody has said, get involved, be prepared, be resilient, take account of what is happening, be sure that you're in a position to know, and once you're there, then you're able to influence policy, and policy will work for you once it takes place that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And Otto?
For my final remarks, I would say that at this point, we can no longer pretend that climate change is not a real thing. I mean, throughout this year, we've seen how the rise in heat has adversely affected the growth of our crops. And that in turn has affected the way that we eat. These foods are not as available as they used to be. So I think rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, I think CARICOM policymakers should definitely leverage the grassroots organizations that are already there, the ones who are already doing the work, their ears are to the ground. Because I mean, we cannot expect the government or these government bodies to do everything, which is why it would be better, I propose that, you know, make use of the resources that are there so that we would better be able to collaborate and work together in addressing these issues, because we're all in it together.
Well, thank you, Otto. Gabrielle?
I think that we should also be thinking about building and developing monitoring and evaluation frameworks into our initiatives that already exist, to ensure that they are not only cost effective, but those that they needed to impact are actually meeting their needs, so that we can have a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach.
Excellent. I think I'm seeing Dr. Hospitalis nodding. So Dr. Hospitalis, you can go and then we'll end with Maisha. Excellent.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, my message to the heads of government would be implement front of package warning labels for food high in salt, fat, sugar, and overall calories. And I would comment to Sean that yes, citizens are important and we want certain things, but the private sector has been blocking this move for 10 years. It was in November of 2013, I first went to the COTED and I went down to the secretariat and I said, we need to warn people about foods that are high in salt, fat, sugar, and overall calories, especially children and especially mothers when they're shopping in the supermarket. I saw a mother shopping in the supermarket 2 weeks ago. She had 27 soft drinks and a chubby little daughter is tagging along with her. I really wanted to tell her something I didn't. My message to the governments in this situation is implement what we've been asking for as civil society through HCC and others for 10, going on to 10 years. Implement front of package warning labels on unhealthy foods.
Powerful. Thank you, James and Maisha.
Thanks, James. I echo Kay's comment in the chat. Amen to that. In 2023, the ministers of health of CARICOM and broader SIDS member states approved the Bridgetown Declaration on NCDs and mental health. And it was the first political declaration or document in which there was an explicit recognition of the impact of the commercial determinants of health on NCD progress. And in that declaration, member states called on the community to help them to develop tools to address the commercial determinants of health, which is they're significantly hampering NCD progress. And so these guidelines are one of the tools in that toolkit of resources to help governments to manage conflicts of interest and safeguard public health nutrition. And James just referenced how a perfect example of where private sector has been obstructing progress in NCD prevention and control. So addressing commercial determinants of health, closing point, we need tools to help member states to do that. And we're really proud that this is one of the tools which can achieve that. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you, Maisha, and thank you to all of the panelists. I'm seeing lots of reactions from our attendees, so hopefully you're walking away with some of these key messages that are critical, I think, for all of us in terms of moving forward, and just for us to remember that the work that we do is really meant to be people-centered and, of course, health above all. So it is I'm very happy to be closing off this webinar. I'm hoping again that all of you thought it useful. The webinar recording will actually be available on HCC's website. And I'm actually going to invite one of our team members, there we go, to pop the link to the resource that we have been talking about throughout this webinar. We're so happy, as Maisha said, to be launching such a critical document, especially right now. And we are encouraging everyone to have a look, to use, to circulate. Before I say anything further, it's my thank yous. I want to thank our panelists for, again, all your preparation, for delivering excellent remarks and interventions today. Again, I think lots of food for thought, especially at this time of the year, as we are thinking about what's happening in 2025 and beyond. So thank you all so much. And to our moderator, Dr. James Hospitalis, and to, again, all of our presenters and panelists. Thank you to the HCC team for a lot of behind the scenes work to make this webinar flow so smoothly. So thank you so much. And again, this really is our last webinar for the year. So on behalf of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, we really want to wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a fantastic start to the new year. A gift to us. Again, please have a look at that resource and share widely with your network. Thank you all so much. I'm seeing lots of love in the chat. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and we're looking forward to engaging again in the new year. Thank you so much. Take care.